The massive council chamber stretched across 3 kilometers of polished crystal floors and towering walls that seemed to reach into space itself. Representatives from 47 different species sat in their designated areas, each section designed to accommodate the unique needs of beings who had evolved on worlds so different they might as well have been from separate universes. The air hummed with translation devices working overtime to convert clicks, whistles, electronic pulses, and telepathic thoughts into something resembling universal communication. Ambassador Jake Morrison stood at the center podium, his simple, black uniform looking almost primitive compared to the elaborate biomechanical suits, energy fields, and crystalline shells worn by the alien delegates around him. His hands rested calmly on the speaking platform as he looked out at the assembled representatives who had gathered for what they believed would be another routine session of galactic politics. The human section was notably small compared to most others. Only 12 seats for a species that controlled dozens of star systems and had been part of the council for 300 years. It had always been that way. Humans never demanded more representation, never pushed for special treatment, never complained about the allocation of resources or territory. They simply did their job and went home. Morrison cleared his throat and the automatic translation systems picked up the sound, broadcasting it as appropriate attention-getting signals to every species present. The chamber fell quiet with the kind of silence that comes before important announcements. Most delegates probably expected another human proposal for increased trade security or a request to mediate some minor dispute in the outer systems. Honored representatives of the Galactic Council, Morrison began, his voice carrying clearly through the vast space. I stand before you today to deliver a message from the people of Earth and all human colonies throughout this galaxy. The Zephyrian, Representative Velthera, shifted in her crystalline housing, her energy patterns flickering with what might have been curiosity. The mechanical being designated Zax-9 turned several optical sensors toward the human podium. Even the normally distracted Andromedan delegates stopped their quiet humming and focused their attention on Morrison. After careful consideration and extensive debate among our governments, the human species formally withdraws from the Galactic Council, effective immediately. We renounce all treaties, trade agreements, mutual defense pacts, and diplomatic relations established through this body. The silence that followed was absolute. For several long moments, nothing moved in the chamber except the slow rotation of monitoring devices and the gentle pulse of life support systems. Then the noise began. 46 different species all trying to speak at once created a sound unlike anything in nature. Translation devices overloaded and began emitting warning tones. The elegant order of council proceedings dissolved into chaos. Morrison waited. He had expected this reaction and had prepared for it. Human diplomatic training included extensive study of alien psychology and crowd dynamics. He knew exactly how long to let the chaos continue before raising his hand for silence. The decision is final and not open to debate. He continued once the noise subsided. However, we will explain our reasoning as a courtesy to those species who have dealt with us honorably over the years. Velthara managed to activate her speaking privileges first. Her translated voice carried undertones of confusion and something that might have been concern. Ambassador Morrison, this action is unprecedented in Council history. What circumstances have led to such a drastic decision? Morrison looked directly at the Zephyrian representative, then slowly turned his gaze to encompass the entire chamber. 6 months ago, this council voted to reclassify humanity as a developing species. The measure passed by a margin of 31 votes to 16. According to this new classification, human expansion beyond our current territory is now restricted. Human colonies are subject to council oversight. Human trade is limited to approved partners. Human military vessels are prohibited from operating outside designated patrol zones. The Altarian delegation shifted uncomfortably. They had been among the species pushing hardest for the reclassification, arguing that human expansion was becoming too rapid and too aggressive for galactic stability. The Centauri Collective had supported the measure for purely economic reasons, hoping to limit human competition in the mining sectors. The stated reason for this reclassification, Morrison, continued there was concern over human territorial ambitions and military capabilities. Several delegates expressed fear that humanity was becoming too powerful, too independent, too difficult to control through traditional diplomatic channels. Zax-9 activated his speaking system. The Council acted within established protocols. Species classifications exist to maintain galactic stability and prevent any single group from dominating others. Surely humans understand the necessity of such measures. Morrison smiled, but there was no warmth in the expression. We understand perfectly. You have made your position abundantly clear. Humanity is unwelcome as an equal partner in galactic affairs. You prefer us as a subordinate species subject to your authority and control. That is not accurate, protested the Andromedan representative. The reclassification was intended to provide structure and guidance, not to diminish human contributions to the Council. Structure and guidance, Morrison repeated slowly. Yes, we have heard those words before. Other species used similar language when discussing their relationships with primitive cultures on their own worlds. We decline your structure and guidance. The ardor implications began to sink in across the chamber. Humanity controlled some of the most strategic trade routes in the galaxy. Human military forces provided security for dozens of systems that other species considered too dangerous or too expensive to patrol. Human scientific research had advanced medical technology, defensive systems, and space travel efficiency by centuries in just the past 50 years. Consider the consequences of this action, Velthara urged. Human withdrawal will create instabilities throughout multiple sectors. Trade routes will need new security arrangements. Existing colonies will require different administrative oversight. The economic disruption alone could affect billions of beings. Morrison nodded slowly. You are correct. There will be consequences. We have spent the past 6 months preparing for them. All human military vessels are already returning to Earth space. Our trade fleets have been notified to complete existing contracts and return home. Diplomatic personnel from human colonies and stations throughout the galaxy are being recalled. The chamber erupted again as delegates realized the scope of what Morrison was describing. This was not a negotiating tactic or a diplomatic protest. This was a complete and immediate severing of all ties between humanity and the rest of the galaxy. Human colonies in non-Earth systems will be evacuated within 90 days. Morrison continued over the noise. We will leave behind any infrastructure that other species find useful, along with detailed instructions for maintenance and operation. Consider it our parting gift to the galaxy that no longer wants our participation. With that, Jake Morrison turned and walked away from the podium. His small delegation followed him in perfect formation, their footsteps echoing in the sudden silence that had fallen over the chamber. The massive doors of the council chamber closed behind them with a sound like finality itself. The delegates sat in stunned silence for nearly an hour before anyone managed to speak. When they finally began to discuss what had happened, most still believed it was some elaborate human negotiating strategy. They expected messages within days, offers to return under better conditions, requests for compromise. No messages came. Within a week, human ships began appearing at colonies and outposts throughout the galaxy, efficiently collecting personnel and equipment before vanishing into the darkness between stars. The withdrawal was methodical, complete, and absolutely final. The security briefing room deep within Council Central Station felt different without humans present. For 3 centuries, at least one human representative had attended every major security meeting, usually sitting quietly in the back and offering practical suggestions when asked. Now the empty chairs seemed to emphasize just how much had changed in the past 4 months since humanity's withdrawal. Director Zax-9 processed incoming data streams from across the galaxy, while his organic colleagues settled into their various seating arrangements. The mechanical being's optical sensors tracked dozens of information flows simultaneously, analyzing patterns that would have taken organic minds hours to comprehend. What he was seeing in the data made his logic circuits run increasingly complex. Probability calculations. Pirate activity has increased by 312% since human withdrawal began, Zax-9 announced without preamble. His synthetic voice carried no emotion. but the statistics themselves were alarming enough. The most significant increases are occurring in sectors previously patrolled by human forces. Commander Lisa Parker, the last human liaison officer still, assigned to council duties, looked up from her datapad. Her orders were simple but clear: complete the transition of security responsibilities to council forces, and then return to Earth space. She had been trying to accomplish this task for weeks, but the council seemed reluctant to actually take control of the areas humans were abandoning. The outer rim sectors are experiencing the worst problems, Parker continued, highlighting star charts on the main display. Without regular human patrols, pirates are becoming increasingly bold. The Krano Syndicate has already seized 3 mining operations and 2 trading stations. Velthera's crystalline form pulsed with agitation. These are areas that human forces patrolled voluntarily. The Council never requested such extensive security coverage. Parker looked at the Zephyrian representative with poorly concealed frustration. Human forces patrolled those areas because pirate activity made them dangerous for civilian traffic. We considered protection of trade routes and mining operations to be basic galactic citizenship. Nevertheless, interjected the Altarian delegate, the Council's own security forces should be sufficient to handle these situations. We cannot be dependent on one species for galactic stability. Zax-9 projected new data across the room's displays. Current Council security assets total 417 vessels distributed across 234 systems. Human forces previously maintained 893 active patrol ships, covering 412 systems. The mathematics are not favorable. The silence that followed was uncomfortable. Most Council species maintained small, military forces primarily for system defense and ceremonial purposes. The concept of large-scale space patrols had always been something humans did, seemingly by choice and without complaint. None of the other species had seriously considered what it would take to replace that capability. Perhaps we could negotiate increased patrol funding, suggested the Centauri representative. Hire private security firms to cover the most critical areas. Parker shook her head. The most effective private security firms are human-owned and operated. They're withdrawing, along with everyone else. Besides, you would need to increase your security budget by approximately 2,000% to match current human patrol coverage. The economic implications hit the chamber like a physical blow. Council finances were managed through careful contributions from member species, with most of the actual funding coming from trade taxes and mining rights. The idea of multiplying security costs 20-fold would require fundamental changes to the entire galactic economy. Surely the situation is not that serious, Velthara said, though her energy patterns indicated considerable uncertainty. Criminal activity may increase temporarily, but market forces will eventually restore balance. As if summoned by her words, emergency alarms began echoing through the station. Red lights flashed in patterns designed to alert every known species to immediate danger. Zax-9's sensors instantly connected to the station's monitoring systems, processing incoming reports from the outer perimeter. Krillian bioships detected at the edge of Council space, Zax-9 announced. Fleet composition, 800 vessels minimum. Dreadnought-class biocruisers leading formation. Current trajectory indicates hostile intent. The chamber fell silent except for the continued wailing of alarms. The Krillian horde had been a persistent threat for decades, occasionally testing Council defenses with small raiding parties that were usually driven back by combined human and Council forces. An 800-ship invasion fleet was something entirely different. Parker was already on her communication device, requesting updates from what remained of the human military presence in the area. The response she received made her face go pale. The nearest human patrol group is Captain Ben Carter's squadron, currently 3 days away and consisting of only 12 ships. They're under orders not to engage hostile forces outside Earth space. What about the Void Rangers? Asked the Andromedan delegate, referring to humanity's elite deep space patrol unit that had handled the worst Krillian incursions for the past century. Disbanded and recalled 2 weeks ago, Parker replied. Admiral Kevin Hayes and his entire command structure are currently in transit back to Earth space. Zax-9 calculated fleet response times while accessing Council military databases. Available Council forces can assemble approximately 400 ships within 6 standard days. Krillian fleet will reach inhabited systems within 4 days at current velocity. The mathematical reality was stark and undeniable. For the first time in living memory, a major hostile force was approaching Council space, and there were insufficient defenses to stop it. The carefully maintained balance of power that had kept the galaxy stable for centuries was crumbling within months of human withdrawal. "Send a message to Earth Command," Velthara ordered desperately. "Request immediate military assistance under emergency protocols." Parker looked uncomfortable. "I can send the message, but I should warn you that Earth's current policy is strictly defensive. Human forces will protect Earth space and human colonies only. The Council voted to restrict human military operations, remember?" The irony was bitter and immediate. The same Council that had voted to limit human military capabilities was now begging for those same capabilities to save them from an enemy that humans had been quietly holding back for generations. "Surely they will not abandon their former allies," protested the Centauri representative. "Humans are not known for callousness." Parker's expression remained carefully neutral. "Humans are known for following the rules and respecting the decisions of legitimate authorities. The Council has made its position on human military involvement very clear." She completed her communication protocols and transmitted the Council's request for assistance to Earth Command. The response arrived within hours, routed through official diplomatic channels with appropriate formatting and language. Parker read it aloud to the assembled delegates. "To the Galactic Council, your request for military assistance has been received and reviewed. Earth Command notes that human military operations outside Earth space were restricted by Council vote 6 months ago. In accordance with Council directives, human forces will not operate outside their designated areas. Earth Command suggests that the Council utilize its own military assets to address the current situation. Signed, Admiral Susan Blake, Earth Defense Force." The message was polite, professional, and absolutely final. Humanity was following the rules exactly as the Council had demanded. They were staying within their designated areas and not interfering with galactic security matters. The fact that this would likely result in the destruction of multiple Council worlds was unfortunate, but not their responsibility. "This is insane," the Altarian delegate exclaimed. "They cannot seriously intend to let the Krillians destroy entire systems over a political disagreement." Parker gathered her materials and prepared to leave the briefing room. Her orders were clear and her duties were complete. The Council classified humanity as a developing species that required supervision and control. Developing species do not typically take responsibility for galactic security. Perhaps you should ask one of the more advanced species to handle the situation. She left the chamber as alarms continued to wail, and desperate Council delegates began calculating whether their combined fleets could possibly stop 800 Krillian bioships. The mathematics were not encouraging, but they were about to learn just how much they had taken human protection for granted. Nexus Prime had been a jewel of galactic civilization for over 2 centuries. The massive trading station orbited a strategic star system where 3 major space lanes converged, making it one of the busiest commercial centers in Council space. Ships from dozens of species docked daily to exchange goods, information, and cultural artifacts. The station's gleaming towers and rotating habitation rings had been jointly constructed by human and Altarian engineers, combining human practicality with Altarian artistic sensibilities. Admiral Keth Vor commanded the Altarian defense fleet from his flagship's Crystal Bridge, watching sensor displays with growing unease. The approaching Krillian bioships looked like nothing in nature, their organic hulls pulsing with bioluminescent threat patterns that made even hardened military personnel uncomfortable. 800 vessels of various sizes moved through space in formations that seemed to follow some alien logic that normal military minds could not comprehend. "Distance to Nexus Prime?" Keth Vor asked his tactical officer. 6 hours at current. Approach speed," came the reply. "The bioships are not attempting to mask their intentions. They appear to be broadcasting some form of challenge signal." Keth Vor studied the enemy formation with sensors that revealed disturbing details. The Krillian ships were larger than previous encounters had suggested, and their bioweapons seem to have evolved significantly since the last major conflict 3 decades ago. Most troubling was the absence of human tactical advisors and support, ships that had been present in every previous engagement with the Krillians. Status of defensive preparations? All available Council vessels have been positioned according to standard protocols. We have 147 ships ready for combat operations. Station defenses are at maximum power. The numbers should have been reassuring, but Kethfor felt only growing dread. For generations, Altarian military doctrine had relied on human strategic planning and technological support. Human officers like General Alex Turner had provided tactical coordination, while human engineers like Dr. Nancy Davis had enhanced their weapon systems with Earth-designed modifications. Now the Altarians faced their greatest threat in centuries with only their own resources. The Krillian fleet arrived exactly when predicted, emerging from hyperspace in a formation that seemed designed to inspire terror. The bioships moved like living creatures, their organic hulls rippling with muscular contractions that propelled them forward. Weapon ports opened along their sides like mouths full of teeth, revealing biocannons that pulsed with malevolent energy. "All ships engage the enemy," Kethfor commanded, trying to project confidence he did not feel. The battle began with the elegant dance that Altarian ships were famous for. The crystalline vessels moved in complex geometric patterns, their energy, weapons creating beautiful but deadly light shows as they engaged the approaching bioships. For the first hour, the engagement seemed to be going well. Altarian energy beams penetrated Krillian bioarmor, and several enemy ships exploded in spectacular displays of organic matter and twisted metal. But the Krillians had learned from previous encounters. Their bioships began adapting to Altarian weapons, developing armor modifications that resisted energy beams and regenerating damage faster than expected. Worse, they demonstrated defensive capabilities that seemed suspiciously familiar to anyone who had studied human military technology. "Admiral, the Krillians are using some form of adaptive shielding," reported the tactical officer. "Our weapons are becoming less effective with each strike." Kethfor watched in horror as Krillian bioships began swarming his formations using tactics that exploited weaknesses in Altarian defensive patterns. Without human tactical coordination, the crystal ships found themselves isolated and overwhelmed. The elegant formations that had worked so well in previous battles became death traps when facing an enemy that had specifically adapted to counter them. "Request immediate assistance from any available human forces," Kethfor ordered desperately. The response came from Admiral Kevin Hayes, currently aboard a human stealth ship monitoring the battle from long range. His voice was professional, but cold. "Negative, Admiral. Human forces are restricted to Earth space by Council directive. We are not authorized to engage." "Your people are watching us die," Kethfor transmitted back, his usual diplomatic composure cracking under stress. "Your people voted to restrict our operations," Hayes replied. "We are following Council orders." The battle turned into a massacre over the next 3 hours. Krillian bioships overwhelmed individual Altarian vessels through sheer numbers and adaptive tactics. The crystal ships fought bravely, but their crews had forgotten how to operate without human support systems and strategic coordination. One by one, the elegant vessels were destroyed or disabled. Nexus Prime's own defenses lasted slightly longer, but the station had been designed with human defensive concepts that assumed human military support would always be available. When the bioships began their final assault on the station itself, the once magnificent trading hub lasted barely 20 minutes before its fusion reactors overloaded and turned it into an expanding cloud of radioactive debris. Admiral Kethfor survived only because his flagship was one of the last to be destroyed. As Krillian bioweapons tore through his crystal ship's hull, his final transmission was broadcast across the galaxy. "The humans were right. We never understood what they were protecting us from." The destruction of Nexus Prime sent shockwaves throughout Council space, but it was only the beginning. Krillian fleets began appearing in systems across the galaxy, attacking with coordination and technology that seemed impossible for their previously chaotic society. The Centauri Collective lost 3 mining worlds in a single day, Andromedan colonies sent desperate distress calls as bioships breached their outer defenses. What terrified Council military analysts was the Krillians' new tactical sophistication. Their bioships now incorporated defensive measures specifically designed to counter Council weapons and tactical doctrines. The improvements bore unmistakable similarities to human defensive systems, suggesting that the Krillians had somehow acquired access to human military technology. The truth was more disturbing than anyone realized. For decades, human forces had captured disabled Krillian ships and studied their technology, developing countermeasures that were shared with Council allies through joint defense agreements. Now that humans had withdrawn from galactic affairs, the Krillians were free to implement their own countermeasures against Council forces without worrying about human interference. Admiral Hayes watched the carnage from his position in deep space, his crew of 47 elite soldiers maintaining their vigil while maintaining absolute radio silence. The former Void Rangers could have turned the tide of any individual battle, but their orders were clear and unambiguous: Earth space only. Lieutenant Paula Grant, his communications officer, broke the tense silence on the bridge. "Sir, we're receiving multiple distress calls from civilian transports throughout the sector. Andromedan refugee ships are under direct attack." Hayes studied the tactical displays showing Krillian bioships pursuing helpless civilian vessels, filled with families fleeing the destruction of their worlds. His jaw tightened as he watched children's voices fade from the communication channels, but his orders remained unchanged. "No response," he said quietly. The Council made their decision. They wanted to handle galactic security without human interference. The systematic destruction continued for weeks. Every Council species discovered that their military forces were inadequate without human support. Defensive strategies that had worked for centuries failed against enemies who had adapted specifically to counter them. Trade routes became death traps. Mining operations were abandoned. Entire civilizations began considering surrender rather than face total extinction. In the depths of space, something else was stirring. Deep monitoring stations detected massive energy signatures from regions that had been quarantined for millennia. The ancient threats that humanity had unknowingly been guarding against were beginning to wake up, drawn by the chaos spreading across the galaxy. The Council's greatest fears were about to become reality, and humanity sat in self-imposed exile, watching everything they had protected fall apart one system at a time. Deep Space Monitoring Station. Theta 7 hung in the void between galaxies, its sensors pointed toward regions of space that had been forbidden territory for over 10,000 years. The automated facility had operated continuously since the early days of galactic civilization, watching for signs of activity from the void sectors where ancient horrors slept in mechanical dreams. For millennia, the sensors had detected nothing but background radiation and the slow decay of dead stars. Dr. Martin Clark studied the incoming data streams from his laboratory on Earth, his weathered face illuminated by holographic displays that showed energy patterns unlike anything in recorded history. As humanity's leading expert on xenoarchaeology and ancient civilizations, Clark had spent 40 years studying artifacts and ruins left behind by species that had vanished before most current civilizations had even evolved. His research had led him to disturbing conclusions about what lay sleeping in the dark regions of space. "Computer, analyze energy signature patterns from Void Sector 12, Clark commanded, highlighting specific data streams that had been triggering alarms for the past week. The artificial intelligence processed terabytes of sensor data in seconds before responding. Energy patterns consistent with massive mechanical activation. Estimated power output suggests structures of planetary scale. Quantum resonance signatures indicate artificial intelligence systems coming online after extended dormancy. Clark felt ice forming in his stomach. His decades of research had identified these signatures before, but only in archaeological contexts. Ancient ruins scattered throughout the galaxy contained evidence of a mechanical intelligence that had once consumed entire star systems, converting all matter and energy into more of itself. The species that had finally stopped this threat had done so at the cost of their own extinction, using quantum resonance weapons that had somehow forced the mechanical entities into hibernation. Computer, cross-reference current quantum resonance. levels throughout Council space with levels recorded over the past 3 centuries. The analysis took longer this time, processing vast amounts of data from monitoring stations throughout the galaxy. When the results appeared, Clark's worst fears were confirmed. Quantum resonance levels have decreased by 47% since human military withdrawal began, current levels approaching critical thresholds for maintaining devourer dormancy. The revelation struck Clark like a physical blow. For 3 centuries, human shield generators and defensive systems had been unconsciously producing the exact type of quantum resonance needed to keep the ancient mechanical intelligence asleep. The technology had been developed for entirely different purposes, but its side effects had been maintaining a barrier that prevented galactic extinction. Clark immediately transmitted his findings to Earth Command, but the response was delayed by bureaucratic processes and security reviews. By the time his warnings reached the appropriate authorities, deep space sensors were detecting multiple massive energy signatures emerging from regions that had been dead for millennia. The first Devourer scout ship emerged from Void Sector 12, like a nightmare made manifest. The vessel was a geometric impossibility, its black hull seeming to absorb not just light, but space itself. Measuring nearly 50 kilometers in length, the ship moved through space with purpose and intelligence that radiated malevolence across all energy spectrums. Unlike organic life forms, it felt no fear, no mercy, no desire for negotiation. It simply existed to consume and convert. Council monitoring stations detected the emergence and transmitted desperate warnings throughout galactic space, but their messages were met with disbelief. Most species had relegated the Devourer threat to mythology and ancient history. The idea that such entities could still exist seemed impossible to civilizations that had grown comfortable and secure under human protection. The first contact between Council forces and a Devourer scout ship occurred near the ruins of Nexus Prime, where Altarian rescue ships were still searching for survivors from the Krillian attack. The crystal vessels detected the approaching mechanical entity and attempted standard first contact protocols, broadcasting mathematical sequences and peaceful intentions across multiple communication channels. The Devourer ship responded by dissolving the leading Altarian vessel with a beam of pure entropy that converted organized matter into component atoms. The crystal ship simply ceased to exist, leaving behind only a brief flash of energy that quickly faded into background radiation. The remaining Altarian ships fled in terror, but the Devourer did not pursue them. It had more important objectives. Within days, similar encounters were reported throughout the galaxy. Devourer ships emerged from the void and began systematic consumption of anything they encountered. Unlike the chaotic Krillians, the mechanical entities operated with terrifying efficiency. They analyzed the defenses of each target, adapted their systems accordingly, and then proceeded with methodical destruction and consumption. Council military forces discovered that their weapons were completely ineffective against Devourer technology. Energy beams were absorbed and redirected back at the attackers. Kinetic projectiles were dissolved by nanite swarms before they could impact. Nuclear weapons barely scratched hulls that seemed to be made from condensed space-time itself. Even worse, the Devourers learned from each attack, developing new countermeasures and incorporating successful defensive strategies into their expanding fleet. The mechanical entities consumed entire asteroids and converted the raw materials into new ships. They dismantled space stations and used the components to upgrade their existing vessels. They absorbed the energy from dying stars and channeled it into weapons that could crack planets like eggs. Most horrifying of all, they began incorporating biological matter into their systems, converting the crews of captured ships into hybrid biomechanical processors that enhanced their intelligence and tactical capabilities. President Rebecca Stone of the United Earth government received the Council's second desperate plea for assistance, while reviewing reports of humanity's own defensive preparations. Earth space had become a fortress with massive shield generators and quantum resonance fields that created an impenetrable barrier around human systems. The same technology that had unknowingly kept the Devourers dormant was now actively repelling their advanced scouts. The Council is offering complete restoration of our seat, expanded territory rights, formal recognition of human sovereignty, and unlimited access to galactic resources, Stone announced to her emergency cabinet session. They're also offering formal apologies for the developing species classification and full autonomy for human military operations. Defense Secretary Ryan Tucker studied tactical displays showing Devourer fleets systematically consuming entire sectors of galactic space. What they're really offering is the chance to save them from extinction. The question is whether humanity should accept that responsibility. The debate that followed was intense and emotional. Some cabinet members argued for continued isolation, pointing out that the council had brought this disaster upon themselves through their arrogance and short-sightedness. Others insisted that humanity had a moral obligation to help, regardless of past grievances. The Devourers won't stop with council space, warned Admiral Susan Blake, studying intelligence reports that chilled her to the bone. They're ancient machines programmed to consume and convert everything in the universe. If they're allowed to establish a foothold in this galaxy, they'll eventually reach Earth space regardless of our defenses. Secretary of Science Dr. Elizabeth Morgan presented the most disturbing evidence yet discovered. Dr. Clark's research indicates that the Devourers are not just consuming matter and energy. They're learning from every species they encounter, incorporating biological and technological advantages into their own systems. Each victory makes them stronger and more adaptable. Stone looked around the table at faces that reflected the weight of an impossible decision: save a galaxy that had rejected them, or watch ancient mechanical horrors consume everything that had taken millennia to build. Either choice would define humanity's role in the universe for generations to come. The real question, Stone said finally, is not whether we can save them. The question is whether we can live with ourselves if we don't try. The emergency session continued for 17 hours as representatives from every human world participated via quantum communication links. The debate was broadcast to every human colony and habitat, allowing all of humanity to participate in what might be their species' most important decision. Outside Earth's solar system, Devourer fleets continued their systematic consumption of galactic civilization, growing larger and more powerful with each victory. Ancient mechanical minds that had slept for millennia were awakening with hunger that could only be satisfied by consuming everything that lived and breathed and dreamed in the universe. The emergency session of Earth's global parliament stretched into its 17th hour, as representatives from 312 human worlds, colonies, and space habitats participated through quantum communication links. The massive assembly hall beneath Geneva's mountains had never hosted a debate of such magnitude, with holographic delegates filling every available space as humanity collectively decided its response to the galactic crisis. Senator Carol Williams, from the Mars Colonial Federation, stood at the main podium, her voice carrying the anger and resentment that many humans felt toward the species that had rejected them. "Let them burn," she declared, her words echoing through the chamber and across human space. "They cast us out when we offered friendship. They called us a developing species that needed supervision. Why should human sons and daughters die for their arrogance?" The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of 3 centuries of hurt feelings and wounded pride. Humanity had joined the galactic community with hopes of peaceful cooperation and mutual advancement, only to be repeatedly dismissed, controlled, and finally rejected entirely. The temptation to let their former allies face the consequences of their own decisions was powerful and understandable. Representative Tony Baker from Luna City offered a different perspective when he took the podium. "We cannot watch an entire galaxy fall to extinction, regardless of past grievances. The Devourers will not stop with council space. They are ancient machines programmed to consume everything in the universe. If we allow them to establish a foothold, they will eventually reach Earth space no matter how strong our defenses become." The debate continued through the night as speaker after speaker presented arguments for and against intervention. Representatives from the outer colonies, who had borne the brunt of council restrictions and oversight, generally favored continued isolation. Delegates from the core worlds, which had maintained closer ties with alien civilizations, tended to support limited humanitarian assistance. Admiral Frank Johnson, the grizzled veteran of the Titan Wars and humanity's most respected military, leader, finally provided the argument that would tip the balance. His weathered face bore the scars of decades of combat, and his voice carried the authority of someone who had seen the true cost of warfare. "We don't fight for the council," he said, his words cutting through the political rhetoric like a laser through armor. "We fight because it's who we are. Humanity has never walked away from a fight that mattered, and we won't start now." Johnson's simple declaration resonated through the chamber and across human space. It touched something fundamental in the human character that had driven their species to explore dangerous frontiers, defend helpless civilians, and stand against impossible odds. The formal vote was close but decisive. 847 for intervention, 823 against, with 234 abstentions. Within hours of the vote, recall codes went out across human space through quantum communication networks that could reach any human vessel or outpost instantly. Admiral Kevin Hayes received new orders while watching Devourer fleets systematically consume another Council world from his position in deep space. The former Void Rangers commander felt relief flood through his system as he opened sealed orders that had been prepared months earlier. Captain Danny Rogers of the carrier UES Defiance was conducting evacuation operations near the Centauri systems when his communications officer received the recall signal. "All ships, this is Earth Command," came the transmission. "Operation Lighthouse is now active. Repeat, Operation Lighthouse is now active. All vessels return to designated rally points immediately." The response was instantaneous and overwhelming. Human ships that had been scattered across the galaxy for months began converging on predetermined coordinates with military precision that impressed even veteran spacers. The evacuation had been carefully planned and executed, but the return was happening with speed that seemed almost supernatural. What the Council witnessed over the next few days would be remembered and studied for thousands of years. Human ships didn't just return to the combat zones, they arrived with modifications and improvements that had been developed during their months of isolation. The lessons learned from studying Krillian bioships and Devourer technology had been incorporated into human military doctrine with typical human efficiency. Captain Laura Davis of the heavy cruiser UES Determination led the first wave of human ships into what had become known as the Devourer Zone, where ancient mechanical entities were systematically consuming everything in their path. Her ship had been upgraded with quantum resonance generators based on Dr. Clark's research, creating defensive fields that could disrupt Devourer nanite systems. The first engagement between human forces and a Devourer scout ship occurred near the ruins of an Andromedan colony world. The mechanical entity detected the approaching human vessel and responded with the same entropy beam that had dissolved dozens of Council ships. But the beam struck Davis's quantum resonance field and simply dispersed harmlessly into background radiation. "Target the geometric center," Davis ordered her weapons officer. "Maximum power on all quantum disruptors." The human weapons were unlike anything the Devourers had encountered. Instead of trying to damage the mechanical ships directly, the quantum disruptors targeted the artificial intelligence systems that controlled them. The Devourer scout ship suddenly stopped moving as its central processing cores were overwhelmed by cascading quantum interference patterns. Chief Petty Officer Amy Collins, working frantically in the ship's engineering section, activated the experimental nanite scramblers that had been developed specifically for anti-Devourer operations. The devices created electromagnetic pulses that disrupted the mechanical entity's ability to adapt and regenerate, leaving them vulnerable to conventional weapons. "Nanite systems are offline," Collins reported. "The target is vulnerable to kinetic strikes." Davis smiled grimly as her ship's railguns opened fire, sending projectiles at significant fractions of light speed into the disabled Devourer vessel. The ancient machine that had seemed indestructible moments earlier broke apart into component pieces that drifted harmlessly through space. The victory was significant, but limited. Individual Devourer ships could be defeated with the right tactics and technology, but there were thousands of them spread across multiple sectors, and they were learning from each encounter just as humans were. The real test would come when the main fleets engaged. Commander Roy Phillips, humanity's leading expert on space combat tactics, developed battle formations that exploited weaknesses in Devourer programming that had been discovered through careful analysis of their movement patterns. The mechanical entities operated according to logical algorithms that could be predicted and countered by creative tactical thinking. The decisive engagement occurred at the Battle of Kepler Station, where the largest concentration of Devourer ships had gathered to consume the massive orbital facilities that had once served as a major council research center. Captain Laura Davis found herself commanding a fleet of 200 human vessels against over 800 Devourer ships in a battle that would determine the fate of galactic civilization. The human ships moved in formations that seemed chaotic to outside observers but followed carefully planned patterns designed to confuse Devourer targeting systems. Each vessel carried quantum resonance generators that created interference patterns. The mechanical entities could not adapt too quickly enough to counter. When conventional tactics began to fail and Devourer ships started overwhelming human defenses, through sheer numbers, humanity demonstrated the quality that had made them unique among galactic species. Instead of retreating or surrendering, human crews began ramming their ships into critical Devourer vessels, using their own destruction to disable enemy systems. Davis made the ultimate sacrifice when she realized that the main Devourer command ship was coordinating the enemy fleet from a position behind a quantum tunnel that made it immune to normal weapons. She ordered her crew to evacuate in escape pods before directing her ship on a collision course that would collapse the tunnel and trap half the Devourer fleet in dimensional fold space. "This is Captain Davis," she transmitted to the human fleet, as her ship approached the point of no return. "Tell Earth that we held the line." The explosion that followed when the UES Determination collided with the quantum tunnel generator created a cascade reaction that severed the Devourer fleet's connection to their command systems. Cut off from central coordination and unable to adapt to human tactics quickly enough, the remaining mechanical ships began a fighting retreat toward the void sectors where they had originated. The battle was won, but the cost had been enormous. Nearly half the human fleet had been destroyed or severely damaged, and thousands of crew members had given their lives to stop an enemy that had seemed unstoppable. But humanity had proven that even ancient mechanical horrors could be defeated by species willing to sacrifice everything for the survival of others. The last Devourer ships disappeared into the cosmic void 3 months after the Battle of Kepler Station, retreating to whatever dark regions had spawned them.